Hitler began immediately to violate the Concord Act at the Vatican. He didn't start systematically killing priests, but like other anti-clerical dictators with whom the church was dealing, he began to act against the church. It's important to understand this. We look at Hitler as the evil guy with hindsight, but when he came to power, there were a lot of anti-clerical regimes in Europe. The inheritance of the French Enlightenment, the French Revolution. There was a lot of anti-clericalism there. And so Hitler looked like one more leader of Europe, anti-Semite as others were also, and not particularly hostile to Catholics, at least not at the beginning. And so there was no reason to foresee all that was going to happen to the Jews. So he began violating the Concord Act. He closed down Catholic schools and seminaries. He closed down Catholic publications. He arrested some priests who were speaking out against him. He closed down monasteries and started deporting the religious, or the monks. He began to expropriate church lands. So that was, and unfortunately, that was typical of a lot of other regimes too, and that the church had to deal with. Now, Nazism, it involved a neo-paganism that was incompatible with Christianity. So, and Pius XII saw this right away. And while he was in Germany, he had spoken against the Nazi ideology. Now, during World War I, Pope Benedict had remained neutral and impartial. He had denounced cruelty and war, but he didn't take sides in the war. And that was the model that Pius XII was going to take during the Second World War, in order to be available to make peace. And the Pope, Benedict XV, had tried unfailingly during but not successfully, during the First World War to offer himself as a peacemaker. If you want to have an international peace conference to settle your disputes, I'll be there. If you want to, I'll be the arbiter if you want. So he had said this, and Pius XII saw his role as similar when the Second World War broke out. Now, why does he not take sides? Also because the church's first concern always is the salvation of souls. It has to work with whatever regime is in power in any country in order to get the best possible terms for Catholics in that country. So his first concern always is the Catholics in this country, we have to take care of them, make sure that they can get to Mass, they can get formation, they can get schooling, education, and their spiritual needs are taken care of. So that's always the predominant priority for any pope, to take care of the Catholics in each country. So he does not want to alienate any given country. He doesn't take sides on political issues normally, but only in clear-cut moral issues. So the church was, as I said, they were working with anti-clerical regimes in Spain, in France, in Italy, in Mussolini, in many ways, and in Germany, and so on. So, and if you see the strategy of the Vatican today, it will often be the same. It will denounce injustice, cruelty, and war, but it won't normally censor individuals or countries. If you think about the pronouncements that John Paul II made with respect to Cuba, or when he was here in Canada, the North American Indians, the Persian Gulf War, the first one, he doesn't take sides. He doesn't denounce. He never stands up and says, you're wrong and you're right, because after the conflict is over, there'll be a great resentment against the Vatican on the part of the people who he's gone against. So he doesn't do that. What he does do is to denounce injustice. Now, people saw this. It was not something, people understood this. In the New York Times, there was an editorial in Christmas of 1942, after Hitler had attacked Poland and France. It said this: in these circumstances, no one would expect the Pope to speak as a political leader or a war leader, or in any other role than that of a preacher, ordained to stand above the battle, tied impartially, as he says, to all people, and willing to collaborate in any new order which will bring a just peace. So he tries to stay above the conflict and to offer himself as a mediator. Now, how can you be impartial when a genocide is going on? Well, you can condemn war, injustice, and genocide, which he did, any unjust aggression, but you don't take sides in a conflict. If you do, as I say, you alienate one side long after the conflict is over. Now, we are used to thinking of the war, Hitler's war, as being unjust. And of course, the anti-Semitism and the genocide obviously were, but most Germans in Germany, they saw this as a national effort to fight off those enemies who had humiliated Germany. For them, it was a just war. They had been humiliated, they had been defeated in the previous war, and they were just getting back what was rightfully theirs. So Germans, to a large extent, I mean, the vast majority of Germans did not see the Second World War as an unjust war, and they saw it as a just war for Germany. Now, the Pope couldn't step in and take the side of the Allies, and he could not condemn Germany without also condemning Russia for what it was doing, and it was by that time it was on the side of the Allies, but also other things, like when when Roosevelt and Churchill tried to press the Pope to condemn Germany by name, he said that, if I do that, I've got to condemn Russia by name because it's killing priests, and I've got to condemn you two by name also because you are bombing indiscriminately civilian targets, which is against just war theory. You cannot be bombing civilians, but that's what you're doing. So you want me to denounce you guys as well? At which point they backed off, because they didn't want that. So, as I say, for us, it's sort of Hitler is the monster, the devil, and in many ways, that's obviously true. But at that time, it wasn't obvious at all, not to Germans anyway. And the key thing here is we're going to see that the genocide that was going on was not known. It was done very secretly. Now, Pacelli knew the Germans and he liked them, but he was not pro-Nazi in any way. On the contrary, he saw the anti-clericalism from the beginning. As early as 1933, we have a record of him showing alarm at the Nazis, the way they're treating the church and the Jews and their political opponents. In 1935, he gave a speech in which he said, the Nazis are possessed by superstitions of race and blood. Their philosophy is essentially opposed to the Christian faith. And he was basically talking to Catholic voters at that time, explaining to them what the situation was. Now, the Nazis knew Pius XII was their enemy. Before the election in 1939, the German ambassador went to the Holy See, went to the cardinals, and he told them, do what you want, don't elect Pacelli. He's our enemy, and we don't want to see Pacelli as Pope. Of course, they elected him right away, but they ignored the German ambassador. But precisely, they knew Pacelli was their enemy. So the Nazi press was against him. There's an internal memorandum written just after his election, which states that his election is very problematic since he's opposed to the Nazi regime. So the Nazis knew very well that Pacelli was completely opposed to them. Because of the violations of the Concord Act, in 1937, Pius XI issued an encyclical letter condemning the attacks on the church. It's titled in English is With Burning Anxiety. It's the only encyclical that's ever been written in German. All the others are written in Latin, and they're translated. So this was read from the pulpits of all Catholic churches on one Sunday in 1937, and it's basically a wholesale condemnation of the ideology of Nazism. And it's now known that that encyclical was written by the German bishops, but it was given its final form by Pacelli, so he's the one who put the final touches on it. He took the input from the German bishops, and then he wrote the final version, and it was issued under Pius XI. Now, with the start of the war, Hitler began to move against the Jews of the conquered nations. What he called the final solution, it's the term given to Hitler's plan to exterminate the Jews of Europe. He experimented with it in 1941, and in January of 1942, he put it into effect. He gave the orders, and in the summer of 1942 it began. So the Holocaust really begins in the summer of 1942. It was secret. Very few people, even in the upper ranks of the Nazis, knew about it. And all the millions and millions of papers of documentation that have survived of the war, the archives and all, there's not a single document that talks about the Holocaust. And one of the reasons, probably there were some that were burnt, but the main reason it was done verbally. And they did not want this. Hitler knew perfectly well the German population wouldn't accept a genocide, and nor would the rest of Europe. And so it was to be done secretly. So not a single document has survived. We know the Holocaust happened because of the Nuremberg trials, where it came out, and the German war criminals talked about it, and there are survivors who talked about it. But it's, and of course, and the evidence of the death camps themselves, but no documentation. It took place in Poland, out of the way of Germany, and there were concentration camps in Germany, but Auschwitz, Belzec, and the other death camps where people were actually getting killed, just systematically, they were located in Poland, out of the way of Germany, so the Germans wouldn't know about it. So over the years, hundreds of thousands of Jews had already been established in ghettos and concentration camps. So these death camps were then set up, the Jews were transported there, gassed to death, and their bodies were burnt.